Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a special guest today, Rob Henderson. You are the author of Troubled, as you can see over your shoulder there. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's great to be here.
For sure, yeah. We're going to get into the book and some of the stuff in there, but first, let's talk about you and your background. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, well, fortunately, the book's a memoir, so there'll be some overlap here in those kind of discussions. I grew up, so it's funny, when people ask me that, I'll say I grew up in California, and then the inevitable next question is, well, California is a huge state, what part? And the answer is kind of all over the state. I grew up in foster homes in Los Angeles, and then later, with my adoptive family, we settled in this working class town called Red Bluff, California, which is way, way up north, part of California many people aren't familiar with, kind of rural, dusty, blue-collar town. And then from there, my family now lives in the Bay Area, just outside of San Francisco. But I left when I was 17 and have been kind of all over the world since, but currently living in New York.
How did you end up in California in the first place?
Yeah, well, so my mother, my biological mother, came to the U.S. from Seoul as a young woman from South Korea, and she was a student in L.A. And at some point along the way, met my father, and I was born in L.A. And I never knew anything about my father. Grew up knowing nothing about that side of my family. And then later, when I took 23andMe, one of these genetic ancestry tests, I learned that I was half Hispanic on my father's side. So my dad was Mexican, mom is Korean. But yeah, I went to, let's see, the first 30 or 31 years of my life not knowing that part of my family on my dad's side. And then when I got those results, it wasn't entirely surprising. I showed the results to a friend of mine. He's like, "You're half Mexican, bro. You grew up in LA. Like, is that really such a surprise?"
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, it's true as well.
Yeah.
That's wild. So did you ever link up with anybody from the biological side after the 23andMe stuff? Because sometimes they'll tell you who you're related to.
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while, something will come up. Like, I'll get these notifications. Oh, there's a second cousin in San Diego or a third cousin, whatever. I don't even know if they give the states or the cities exactly, but kind of a vague geographic location. But no one, no one close enough that I would be rushing to meet or anything. I mean, I lost contact with my mom when I was 3. And then got placed in the homes later. So, the way the timeline worked out was my mother and I, when I was born, we were living in, pretty dire poverty. We lived in a car for a while. We were homeless for a short period of time. Eventually, we got this apartment in Westlake, which is a pretty rundown part of LA at that point in the early 90s. And when I was 3, some neighbors saw the squalor we were living in this apartment complex and called the police, and they contacted some social workers, and they saw what was going on, and my mom was strung out on drugs, and so they asked her, "Where's this boy's father? Because you're clearly not equipped to care for him."
Right.
And she said she didn't know who my dad was, and so then at 3 years old, I was placed into the LA County foster care system, where I lived for just shy of 5 years. And then later, I was adopted when I was 7, just before my 8th birthday, by this couple. It was a married couple, man and a woman, and their daughter. She was their biological daughter, who became my younger adoptive sister. And then we settled in Red Bluff. And then I spent kind of the second half or so of my childhood in Red Bluff, California. And there's a lot of there's a lot of drama, a lot of catastrophes, and mistakes. And my adoptive parents, they separated. My adoptive father stopped speaking with me, and I didn't know this at the time, of course, because I was just a kid. But I got this front row seat into what's been happening to a lot of families and a lot of working class neighborhoods all across the country, of a lot of drugs. This was just kind of the beginning of what later became known as the opioid epidemic. A lot of my friends raised by single moms, single parents. I had one friend raised by a grandmother because his dad was in prison, his mom was on drugs. Um, and this was mostly a kind of white and Hispanic working class town uh, in this rural part of California, and that pattern has been growing in so many different neighborhoods all across the country of people who are suffering for various reasons, some of it related to poverty, but a lot of it related to other factors as well, culture, mindset, low expectations, and that kind of thing. And so by the time I was 17, I barely graduated from high school. I had a 2.2 GPA. Was really not a focused student at all. Got into a lot of trouble with my friends and a lot of fighting, drinking, and driving, and all kinds of stupid stories that I tell in the book. And then kind of a half impulsive decision to enlist in the Air Force. And I was 17. I had to have my adoptive mom sign a permission slip for me because I was underage. And I'm sure many of your listeners are aware of this, but you can enlist in the military at 17, but you just have to have a parent or guardian to sign some documents. And so, yeah, I shipped out for basic training like 6 weeks later in the summer of 2007. And from there, with some missteps and some hiccups along the way, found myself using the GI Bill to go to Yale. And yeah, from there, I had this bizarre experience of learning what elite universities were like, from someone of my background, kind of Air Force and then foster homes, and not exactly the typical profile of someone who goes to a school like that, and witnessing a lot of the excesses and stupidity of what later became known as like cancel culture and deplatforming and all the lunacy that you see on elite college campuses. And then yeah, from there I went on to the University of Cambridge in England to get a PhD, thinking, oh, well, maybe all of this craziness that's happening on American college campuses, it's just a US thing. I'm going to go over to England. I'm going to go to one of these fancy universities that is disconnected from what's happening in the US. And then it turns out they have the same weird political correctness or wokeness or whatever you want to call it that's happening over there too. And then from that point, I finished my PhD and just decided to become a full-time writer because I just couldn't tolerate. I had no patience for what I was seeing in any of these institutions. And a lot of this was shaped by my upbringing and what I consider to be real struggles versus what people claim to be difficulties or struggles in their lives. And coined this phrase luxury beliefs, which we can get into later, but that's kind of the story in a nutshell, and we can get into any of that you want.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically like Mexican Korean version of JD Vance, I guess, right? I mean, so far.
Yeah, I've been called worse.
Yeah, it's like there's some parallels there. There's a real elegy vibe to the story, but it's not an oh man, it's not an uncommon story, to be honest. I don't know how many of how many people exposed to this stuff at a young age end up in academia or in writing specifically, but a lot of my friends that play in the NFL, for example, lived your exact life, not with the foster homes necessarily, but very similar with the upbringing. How much do you actually remember from the early part of your childhood? I know your mother had substance abuse stuff going on, which probably contributed to the squalor you mentioned. How much of that stuff do you actually remember up until the point where I guess you get adopted?
I remember quite a bit of it, actually. Yeah, I have these very sharp and vivid memories. So the memories of my mother are vague. I have two clear memories of her. The first being, and this is basically the opening of the book, is I'm 3 years old, gripping my mother. I'm in her lap, and I'm clinging to myself, and I see these two tall figures wearing black clothes, and obviously now I know they're police officers, but at the time I didn't know who or what they were. But I sensed in my gut that they were coming to separate my mother and I, and that something was about to change. And then the second memory of her is we're in this long white hallway, and I have this carton of chocolate milk that I spilled. And then I look to my mother for help, and she can't because she's sitting next to me wearing handcuffs. And then from there, my memories carry forward to being in a car with this unfamiliar adult who I later would learn is my social worker. And then, all the memories of the foster homes and the separations. And, it's hard enough, Dan, just going from home to home as a little kid,
Mm.
not knowing where you're going to be placed from one week or one month to the next. But then there were times when I would befriend my foster siblings. Like I'd join a home and I'd be a little apprehensive, nervous at first, but then, a couple of the kids I found myself getting along with them and they'd become my friends and kind of a stable force in my life. And then, I'd wake up one morning and one or both of them would be gone because they would be returned to their family of origin or they'd be placed in another foster home. And so not only would I not know where I would live from week to week, but I wouldn't know whether my foster siblings would be around either. And that takes a toll on kids, as you can imagine,
Yeah.
and little boys acting out in response to that. And I was no exception. So yeah, I remember a lot of what had happened and all of the memories and the feelings. And there are parts that I didn't fully remember, but I try to be clear about that in Troubled when I say like this is what I remember, but then there are some gaps here and I can't fully recall this interaction, but here's what I do remember. But I think you'll find if you sit down and try to write about your childhood, more will come out of you than you expect for most people.
Yeah, I bet. I don't think I've ever really spent a whole lot of time on that, to be honest. My dad was kind of a dick, uh, physically abusive, but for a long time I hated him, but now he's just like some dude. I mean, I think you've got like when you're a kid, the way this is a big problem. I talk to people about this a lot. I'm like, it's really important that you be intentional with your children, even in a tumultuous situation, because the first several years that you say the phrase "I love you," you have no idea what it means, right?
Yeah.
As a child, but that's something that your parent will often repeat to you, or even just random relatives or people or whomever it is, and the constitution of that phrase, which will go on to define a great deal of your life, should you not interdict it at some point, is going to come from the associated behaviors towards you from those people that teach you the phrase "I love you" in the beginning, right? So does "I love you" mean nothing to you because they say it and leave and do nothing for you? Does it mean abuse? Does it mean something else? That's a big deal for a child, right? Because you go out into the world and all of the other positive emotions kind of spring from that to some degree.
Yeah.
There's obviously not everything is as intense as the phrase "I love you," or sometimes I guess maybe some are more intense than that, but everything kind of flows forth from that. If you can't trust, that's the fundamental principle, right? Of how you're supposed to, the relationship you're supposed to have with the people who are responsible for you. And if that gets interrupted at any point, it cascades throughout the rest of your life, in a super negative way, not just in how you process positive emotions, but also how you will see yourself, your self-worth, and how you'll accept and not just receive, but accept bad behavior towards you from other people.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I have a line early on in the book where I say, if a kid is let down enough by the adults in his life, eventually he'll learn to let himself down.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're disappointed by the people around you who you're supposed to trust, who are supposed to guide you and mentor you and help you to develop and grow, and they don't do those things, then yeah, eventually a lot of that, the negativity turns inward and you start to yeah, do things that you'll regret later, a lot of self-defeating behavior and that kind of thing. And, to your earlier point that, yeah, it's this is something that, a lot of developmental psychologists have written about, that the original bond that you have with your parents, the primary caregiver, usually the mother, not
Mm-hmm.
always, but usually the mother, in the first 5 to 7 years
Yeah.
of your life is critical. If you establish that trust and that connection and yeah, feelings of "I love you" and so forth, and it means something important to you, then you'll be able to use that relationship as a template for future
Mm-hmm.
relationships with your friends, romantic partners, other family members, just that feeling of kinship and bond and trust. But if you don't have that, then that internal model can freeze,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes a lot of work in adulthood to undo and to work through and to learn how to trust other people, trust yourself, and try to do things that will, make your life and the lives of other people better. But yeah, I didn't hear "I love you" probably till I was 7, maybe 8 years old. In part because I was in the foster homes, and if you're
Sure.
an adult, even if you are a good foster parent, if you know a kid for 2 weeks or 2 months,
Mm.
you're not going to tell the kid "I love you." And so I didn't really hear that for a long time. And later, as an adult, this was pointed out to me. Um, and I thought, okay, no one really loved me when I was a kid. And that it hit me pretty hard. But then when I considered that I had never really loved anybody either, that actually hit me harder for some reason.
Mm.
And yeah, it took a lot of work. I was in the military, and then seeking treatment and counseling and all these things, and reading and a lot of self-development and self-work before I could finally access all those feelings
Yeah.
and learn how to basically acquire all of those inner resources that you're supposed to get in childhood.
Sure. Yeah. That's a simple answer in my opinion. All the stuff that goes into being a man, especially. I don't know how it works for women because I've never been one. TBD on the rest of my life. I think I'll just stick it out as a dude. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know how it is for women, but as a man, all the things that you do that give you biofeedback that we associate with love and that make societies great, like being a provider of not just things, but safety, be a protector, all this stuff, being strong, being stoic, all these things. They flow forth from that, right? That's the feedback that we get. Like being a good man is rewarding. It's the most rewarding thing that you'll ever do, to be honest. I mean, I can't imagine feeling better than, you know, even just simple shit like teaching the kid a new skill or something like that, or your woman is upset and you comfort her. That those things are very meaningful to dudes, and on like a physical level, I mean, right? And it validates your entire existence. That's when I know I've rung the purpose bell for that day, right? I did my job today, and I know it now. And the way that we express love is typically in one of those fashions. We don't, like, some dudes are poets and shit like that, but for the vast majority of men, it isn't the words we say that are going to express our love. It's going to be the things that we do in some regard, right? Or the service we provide, or whatever it happens to be. And yeah, that's a tough thing to go without. I mean, it's
Yeah.
we talk that there's a lot of discussion about purposelessness and nihilism in our culture today, and I think it permeates through every part of our culture. And that's the solution to it, is to find something that you love more than yourself.
Yeah, yeah, that's well put. Yeah, I've thought about this, the connection between those early life experiences where a growing number of kids are living in these fragmented, unstable environments, and then in adulthood, you're going to see the consequences of that later on.
Mm.
And there are other factors, of course. There's, whatever you want to point to, culture and technology and all these other things. But yeah, if you don't have good relationships as a kid, it's not like hit your 18th birthday and suddenly you're a capable, functional person who is optimistic and full of hope and loves being around people and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's there are all these downstream consequences from that. And I'm skeptical that this is entirely due to poverty. I mean, in part because poverty is actually at lowest
Mm.
level in the country that we've seen. I mean, in the year 1900, by modern standards, in the year 1900, 90% of the country was living in poverty. And yet, when you look at things like marriage rates, family stability, and that kind of thing, they were much higher than they are now. Or you could look at the Great Depression, right, where 25% of the country was unemployed,
Mm.
people were in desperate financial situations, and yet, the era of our great grandparents, they were getting married, they were having kids, they were doing their best to keep it together. And then you see what's happening today. Did I lose? Oh, are we good?
Yeah, hang
I
on a
think
sec.
we
Hang on a
okay,
sec.
sure.
Oh,
Oh,
it
there we
is.
are.
Yeah, sorry.
Um, and one statistic that I try to point out to people, is if you go back to 1960, you'll find that regardless of social class, socioeconomic status, 95% of American kids were raised by both of their birth
Mm.
parents. 95%, rich kids and poor kids alike. If you fast forward to 2005, for upper and upper middle class family, so this is families in roughly the top 20% of the income scale. 85% of kids born into that income scale, the top 20%, are still raised by both of their married parents. 85%. So it was 95% in 1960, drops to 85% by 2005. But for poor and working class kids, so these are kids in the bottom 30%, the number was 95% in 1960, and by 2005, it plummeted to 30%. And so now, when you visit poor and working class neighborhoods in the country, seeing kids raised by two happy, committed, married adults, that's an anomaly now. Um, and there were poor people in 1960, so this can't be solely a question of poverty. And then, relatedly, another statistic that's worth pointing out here is that if you look at something like college graduation rates, um, so if you look at the average in the US as a whole for American adults, about 38% of American adults have college degrees. So this is over the age of 25. 38% is the average. For kids born into poor families in the bottom income quintile, so kids born to poor families, the college graduation rate is 11%. It's much lower than the average of 38%. But then when you look at kids who are raised in foster homes, the number is only 3%. Only 3% of foster kids graduate from college. So, in other words, a kid born into a poor family in the US is 4 times more likely to graduate from college than a kid in foster care. And, to qualify to be a foster parent, you can't be living in poverty. You have to meet some minimal financial threshold before the state will allow you to care for kids. Now, granted, most of these homes weren't great. They're kind of on the boundary between working class and lower middle class families, but they weren't poor. But then the graduation rate is so much lower than it is for kids who are actually poor. And this indicates that something else is missing. And I think it's what you and I have been talking about here about emotional connection and relationships and, learning how to have the right mindset and that kind of thing. And yeah, this is, I think it's a mistake that a lot of people focus on. Oh, it's poverty. Just give people more money, just more income transfers, more financial benefits. Maybe that'll help a little, but ultimately this is a problem of culture and mindset, I think.
100%. Yeah, that whole idea is fucking stupid, in my opinion. It's the West. We want the microwave solution of things. We try our best to solve things for no apparent reason, as far downstream as possible. So you see some correlation with poverty and crime, which, by the way, has been the case for most of human history until recently, because for most of human history there wasn't a rampant fatherless scenario. It just didn't exist, right? There were pockets from time to time after big wars and stuff like that, but for the most part, it just wasn't a thing. So poverty was, for a very long time, the number one predictor of crime in most of the criminology studies up until about the 1960s, actually, when it started to decline. So now the biggest predictor of criminal activity are fatherless homes. Okay, cool. So we can just put more dads out on the streets to get. I mean, that's a solution. That's a dumb. It's just that, like, narrow-minded solution is just as dumb as just give them houses. The housing first stuff, which your home state likes to do, and I think Salt Lake City did it back in the day to disastrous results. They just created like a giant heroin den in downtown Salt Lake City, right down the street from where I lived at the time. But I mean, you're a smart guy. You've studied this stuff, so you know. But it isn't just about the poverty, because people come out of poverty all the time very well prepared for life. You know what I mean? Out of abject poverty sometimes, and they know the right kind of values. It's like, what is the? I guess it's the cultural solution to poverty that you engage with. It's going to shape the way that you feel about it. For example, if you're given, I mean, I guess you could best encapsulate it in the teach a man to fish ethos, but it's, if you tell somebody that it's the government's job to take care of them, they're going to go one of two ways. They're either going to go full victimhood and entitlement, which is in my opinion, that's the most common one, which is why our welfare and Medicaid system is what, the 80% of our fucking budget or something like that. It's crazy. It's like $3.5 trillion a year. That's the vast majority of it. The other part is what you typically see with nihilist men, which is they create something of a parallel society, right? So the Italian mafia and the United States, you can tell people will create a parallel economy first. That's typically how it works, is they feel like they aren't part of the general society and economy. Same thing with modern gangs, street gangs these days. Terrorists do the same thing. And I would say from a cultural standpoint, the same symptom is mass shooters. We're just talking about, I've been talking about this a lot lately, but it's the biggest difference between these groups are what they consider to be currency, right? So the currency missing from the early gangs is actual money, so they create a parallel economy. The currency missing from the terrorist is religious fanaticism of some sort, and the terror or the currency for the mass shooter, the nihilist, the modern nihilist, whatever they happen to be, is typically love and recognition. They want love and recognition, whether they can admit that to themselves or not. That's what they want, and the way they go about getting it is typically at some point through violence, right? And they justify the violence because they consider themselves to be outside of society, so they don't have to play by those rules. And then to some degree, they also feel like they're at war with that society, so they see themselves as soldiers. It's an insane way to believe, or it's an insane way to go through life, but it's very common. It's not uncommon. It didn't just start 10 years ago or even in 97 with Columbine and the mass shooter thing. This has been going on through all of human history. Anytime there's been an outcast group of people that exist inside of your society, then they will develop their own parallel economy. They'll develop their own rules, and as a result, they'll develop their own culture that looks completely unrecognizable to people like you and me. But it exists in there, and people can't understand why people are doing this. You should go talk to them. Just talk to these people and ask them, why do you think it's okay to deal drugs? Well, I don't have any other opportunities. Well, that's not true, right? But they believe it's true, and that's what really matters. So, we've back to the original point. We solved this problem as far downstream as possible. As far downstream, these people are poor and hungry. Let's just give them food and they'll be fine. Nope. You've not given, especially for men, you've not given this guy a purpose to live. You haven't given him any way to pull himself up by his bootstraps. He doesn't have the capability to do that if you keep stringing him along like this. And the results are in, my friend. It does not work ever.
Yeah. If you just give people cash transfers, and this is, there have been interesting recent studies on this point. I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with this idea of UBI, Universal Basic Income, but there have been interesting studies, long-running studies, where if you give people cash transfers for a long period of time, you actually don't see much in the way of improvements, like long-term improvements. In the short term, the people you give money to will say, yeah, they're a little bit happier, or they get to go on a little vacation, or they buy a nicer car or something. But in the long run, you don't really see positive outcomes for those kids. Graduation rates don't really change all that much. Mental health outcomes, all these kinds of things. It's really, for a lot of proponents of redistribution and UBI, they've been really disappointed by the fact that, it's a lot of this is not just money. You don't just give people money. You need to give them, these non-tangible tools of mindset, habits, goals, and those kinds of things. And to your earlier point about crime and poverty, there is a link, but it actually goes in the modern world. It actually goes in the opposite way that people think. So most people think, well, people are poor and then they commit crimes. But actually, the vast majority of poor people don't commit any crimes at all. They go to work, they try to make ends meet, they have their minimum wage jobs or what have you, and they live within the confines of the law. The actual direction, the arrow of causation, seems to be that crime causes poverty. That if you are a criminally inclined person and you're impulsive and short-sighted and prone to betraying others when it conveniences you, when you're prone to shortchanging people and taking advantage, and you're exploitative and manipulative and all those kinds of things, all of those personality traits and characteristics, that is what predicts crime, of course, but it also predicts poverty, that you don't think long-term for your future. So, of course, if you're that kind of person, it's not as if those traits were caused by poverty. You had those traits, and then you start to slip down the rungs of society. And you'll find there's interesting work on this on downward social mobility. So a lot of us will focus on upward mobility, what predicts someone who starts at the bottom and climbs their way upward. But there are also interesting studies on the reverse of what about the people who are at or near the top of the ladder and they start to slip downward. And you'll find that those people tend to have traits like impulsivity, they tend to be thin-skinned, they tend to be prone to emotional outbursts more. They score higher on the personality trait of neuroticism, and they're starting to slip down the rung of that ladder. So, and those traits also tend to predict criminality as well. And also, the other point about this is that, of course, the people who claim that poverty causes crime are also the same people who love to call rich people criminals,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, if you have money, then you're a criminal too. So, which is it? Is it that poverty causes crime, or that rich people are all criminals, even though they're rich? So, there's an inconsistency there too. And it is true that rich people commit crimes, but if you admit that, then you also have to accept that it's not the case that poverty is the sole determining factor for crime. And what you were saying before about young people, young men creating these parallel societies of being, forming these groups. There's a psychologist I like, Joyce Benenson. She wrote a great book on sex differences called Warriors and Worriers. And one of the things she points out in this book is that, for boys who are neglected or they feel, they've been led to believe somehow that they have no opportunity, they will often form street gangs, they'll form mafias. In more positive situations, they may be drawn to sports or things that will channel their aggression and their anger. They may be drawn to militaries and that kind of thing. But yeah, there does seem to be this tendency for young guys to band together in some way. And the trick for society is to take that impulse and channel it in a positive, productive direction. So, sports and militaries versus mafias and street gangs. But yeah, I am intrigued by that, that urge and that desire, and people still seem to be at a loss for what to do. You see a lot of young guys who are falling behind in education, in terms of relationships, marriage rates, unemployment, failure to graduate from college, all these things. And for the longest time, I think people thought that young guys, there was almost this kind of reverse sexism, I suppose, that like the tastemakers and the policymakers thought that, well, we're going to give young women a leg up in society because there have been centuries and decades and so on of sexism and prejudicial attitudes towards women. So we're going to prop women up, but then simultaneously there was also this cultural trend of kicking men down, of neglecting young men and saying that, you had your turn, now you have to take a seat and that kind of thing. But actually, if you look cross-culturally, especially if you look at non-traditional, pre-industrial kind of hunter-gatherer societies, those societies almost universally have rituals and rites that attempt to shepherd boys into men. And if you remove those rituals and that cultural pressure to get boys to transform into men, then they're going to be aimless and adrift. And so actually our culture kind of got it backwards, where we thought that, oh, well, boys are going to be fine, we'll just leave them alone, or we'll even maybe denigrate them or kick them down a little bit, and they're going to be just fine, and we're going to prop women up. But actually, historically, women have actually done pretty okay. I mean, of course, like I'm not saying that they didn't have it hard or whatever, but like in terms of the development of turning a girl into a woman, that didn't require nearly as much in the way of rituals and cultural norms and pressures for that development to take place. But to turn a boy into a man always took a lot of cultural effort and concentration and diligence and so on. And we've completely removed that from our society.
Yeah, it's it's a very silly problem, to be honest. I mean, it really is. It's like somebody who lives in a walk up on the Upper East Side, and they have an Australian cattle dog for a pet. Like, how'd you think that was going to go? He's ripping the fucking furniture up. Of course he is. You know what I mean? Like, that's what the dog does. It's his nature. And, I think this is part of this seems like I love Hanlon's razor. I don't know that everything is always nefarious. I think people are just dumb, but This one seems like an easy one. You know what I mean? And it seems like a large part of our society is captured. I don't know what you would even want to call it, the is-ought fallacy, or maybe you could say it's the suicidal empathy that people refer to a lot,
Hmm.
which I think it's a little bit of both of those things. It's like things are the way they are, my friend. Testosterone is a thing. Young men
Hmm.
need their Hemingway moment. You know, they need to
Hmm.
go out and explore and break shit and discover who they are, learn the purpose of power that it's designed to protect and build, not to injure. You know what I mean? I mean, that's a
Hmm.
really important thing for a young man to learn. And I
Yeah.
don't know where young men learn that anymore, to be honest. I mean, especially like you're about what are you 35?
Yep.
You're like 9 years younger than me. Yeah, I don't know where your generation learned it from. You grew up in solid tech age, right? Like me, I was in the transition phase. There was no point, or there was a point in my childhood where the internet wasn't a thing. It wasn't relevant.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
in my early teen years, kind of started becoming a thing from your childhood, basically. It
Yeah.
was a thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was a slow, like I witnessed the kind of transition over
Mm,
as like during my childhood, it was what, late 90s, early 2000s. And also I think, because of the situation I grew up in, we were probably a few years behind the mainstream cultural advancements and trends. So we didn't get dial up until I think 2000. I was 10 years old.
mm,
And then yeah, I don't think we ever had was it fast internet, cable internet, or DSL or whatever. I didn't get that until later, until after I had enlisted and got my own place. Um, but yeah, it was a slow transition with flip phones, and YouTube kind of took off my junior and senior year of high school. But what I remember as far as the kind of, I don't think it's changed that much in terms of where are kids learning values and norms and habits. It's through largely, I think for the worse, it's from pop culture. Um, and so when I was growing up, a lot of it was from, music and movies and TV shows, and to a lesser extent by books. But now I think a lot of it is social media. It's TikTok, Instagram, whatever, and that's where kids are learning what kind of life to live, what to value, and
mm,
that kind of thing. And yeah, this is not an improvement. Everything seems very ephemeral and fleeting. There are no sort of sturdy principles now I think young people have to guide their lives by. And so, people have no sense of historical context, or there are a lot of problems, which we've been talking about, but there are also great things about living in the modern age too. And kids aren't really taught to have gratitude for what's
mm,
been built, and for the fact that for most of human history, people were just struggling to eke out a halfway decent life out of the mud. And now you have, all of the wonders of modern tech, and people are miserable. And I think part of it is relationships and so on. But I
mm,
think part of it is just this lack of perspective of, yeah, like you may have a bad day, but what did a bad day look like 10 generations ago? What did a bad day look like when you when you had a cavity before modern dentistry? There are so many things that we could be more appreciative of. But yeah, there's not much in the way of positive cultural messaging. And then
mm,
whenever anyone does come out and attempt to model good, positive, masculine behavior, they're often vilified for it. So I'm thinking of a friend of mine, Jordan Peterson,
mm,
when he came onto the scene, whenever it was 6, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, maybe. He was giving kind of, standard like boomer conservative advice about making your bed and cleaning your room, and getting your life together. And these were things that a generation or two ago people's fathers were telling them, and he was repeatedly excoriated for drawing an audience of young men and trying to inspire them in some way. And then when he took a step back from the public limelight, then even more toxic figures came in, and there's always going to be that impulse, that draw toward what excitement and thrill seeking and the kind of underbelly of things. And, you don't want to indulge that, but social media will indulge that and feed into people's most, nihilistic, I know you used that word earlier, nihilistic and dark urges. When really, I think if you want a healthy and productive society, you have to acknowledge that that part of young men exists, but then also to attempt to nurture it and shepherd it, channel it towards something more productive and healthy.
Yeah, I mean, nobody plants seed in a field where things don't grow. It's a fact.
Yeah.
And it would
Yeah.
be foolish to do so. But I love the proverb that societies grow great when men plant trees under the shade of which they'll never sit. Right. So I think
Hmm.
as to no matter what we do in society, no matter what industries are available or what challenges we have during our generation or whatever the circumstances are that are out of our control, the two things rather that are in our control are our attitude and our effort. We can use these things to shape the world around us to some degree. And I think our not singular focus, but our primary focus should be on creating something worth investing in. That should be the goal. And not just that, but messaging to young men specifically that things are worth investing in and that you can get something out of this, and that you can build something great. I mean, it would be understandable for someone like you to be bitter and have little gratitude, but maybe not. Maybe there is some inverse relationship to having an easy life and having gratitude later in it, because I mean, my early days were not great either. Why do you think that you chose, looking back on it now, I'm sure the Air Force helped a little bit, but why do you think you chose independence and responsibility instead of victimhood and entitlement, which are a lot more common these days, in my opinion?
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's always the question of nature and nurture and genes and environment and that kind of thing. And I was always a pretty curious kid, a resilient kid. But there was a period in my teens, early 20s, where I did start to become resentful and bitter and angry when I thought about, everything that I had gone through and the way that my friends and I had grown up and all of the disappointments and obstacles. But, honestly, a lot of it was just, reading history and biographies and memoirs of other interesting people. And, I mentioned historical context earlier of, every era, there are struggles and difficulties that are characteristic of the time, and people can, occasionally make the most of it, of taking their meager resources and building something larger than the sum of its parts. And those stories always inspired me. And so, there was a point, yeah, probably 16 or 17, when I started thinking about my future, realizing I wasn't going to go to college, at least not right away, and thinking what options I had before me. And, this was, yeah, 2007. So the military was much more a part of the everyday conversation because of the wars, because it was just a few years after 9/11. The military was spoken about more. And I thought, well, what's the fastest way I can get out of this environment that feels like it's weighing me down? Just as an example of this, when I was in high school, I got placed into some of the advanced science courses. I got placed into this chemistry class, and I realized that I would actually have to put in some effort if I wanted to pass this class. And so it was more difficult than I thought. Up until that point, I was able to kind of bullshit my way through every class and kind of get that C minus and move on. In this case, I was failing it because I wasn't doing any of the homework and I wasn't studying and realizing like, oh, I actually have to pay attention here. I went to my guidance counselor and asked him if I could be transferred into the lower level science course. And he did what good guidance counselors should do, which was he tried to talk me out of it. And he said, look, Rob, you're a smart guy. You should stay in the chemistry class and you're going to go on to college. And I told him I didn't want that. And he gave me this form, told me to have my parent or guardian sign it, and then they could transfer me out of this course into the lower level course for science. And I went home and I forged my mom's signature and came back, got transferred out. And that's kind of that was the student I was just I didn't want to put in any effort, a lot of aimlessness, a lot of low expectations for myself. But when the future started to become increasingly real to me because for reasons I explained in the book, there was nowhere for me to go after high school.
Mm,
There was a lot of sort of family drama and so on. I didn't really have a place to live after that. The military stood out to me as the quickest way to reverse my fortunes and change my future. And so, I didn't really know exactly what I was getting myself into, but that was step one. And then, speaking with a lot of the other guys about their lives and struggles and how they ended up in that basic training unit. And then later, when I got to my first duty station and started to feel proud of myself, things I was doing. And this is like kind of a classic case of you take a young guy with a little bit of promise and potential and put him in the right environment with
mm,
mentorship and rules and structure and predictable consequences for misconduct. And that was what I needed at the time, even if in the moment there were many days where I I hated my life. Like, when you're 18, 19 years old, you want to have some freedom. You want to, do things that aren't good for you. But that structure of the Air Force kind of contains it and doesn't allow you to make many mistakes. And that was actually more important in the long run, was not so much what it taught me, but what it didn't allow me to
mm.
do, which was act on my worst impulses.
Yeah.
And then from there, yeah, started to grow some appreciation for what I was capable of and realized I could set my sights higher. But it was a long, the way I'm
Yeah.
describing it is as if it happened very quickly. It took 8 years. So I was in from age 17 to 25, and I needed all 8 of those years before I could finally develop enough to be an adult.
Sure.
And this is one reason why, occasionally when I give public talks, I'll visit high schools, colleges, talk about some of this stuff. A common question I'll get is, well, should we have a national service for young men? And I think, I guess in principle, I'm conflicted. I guess I have that libertarian impulse of
Mm,
I don't know about sort of government mandated coercion to like impress young people into the armed services if they don't want to do it.
yeah.
But there was a lot of good outcomes for me, and so I can see the argument for it too. But the thing is, most of the time, national service is, I mean, what is it? Other countries do it. It varies, 2 years, maybe up to 5 years. We could go very draconian. North Korea, the men have to serve for 10 years. But I don't think we want to be North Korea. And so I think, for me, I needed 8 years. And I don't want to be immodest or whatever, but I was, like I said, I was a pretty smart, curious kid
Mm,
already, and I still needed 8 years to get my shit together. A lot of other guys, I don't know if a year or two of national service is going to turn their lives around that much. It would be an interesting experiment if we did it kind of at the state level. If a particular U.S. state tried something like this, I mean, National Guard or something,
mm.
reserves, and just kind of rolled it out as a trial, as a pilot study. But yeah, in my case, yeah, it took a long time to get everything in order.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we should. I've been saying this for years, probably a decade at this point. We need to make some serious changes in public education. Actually, I don't think public education should even be a thing. Frankly, the government should be involved in education. But I do think that even in a private school, private education, you have to move the language requirement if you're going to have one back to elementary school where it belongs. Nobody's learning fucking Spanish, French, Italian, German, whatever in the 10th and 11th grade. It's just not happening. The retention rate for that information that you get from 4 semesters of some a foreign language in high school is nonsense. That is a complete waste of fucking time. But if you do it at 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, it's going to be highly effective. And if you continue to use it, if you just make them read one book a year after that, even they'll retain quite a bit of it. And I think we should replace those 4 semesters in high school with some kind of service requirement. Not in the military, obviously, because you're in high school, but you got to do something. Go drive for Meals on Wheels or some shit. You got to do some kind of community service for 4 semesters during high school to graduate. And I do think we should incentivize. I mean, obviously they do with bonuses and stuff from time to time. Usually it's based on needs of the military if we're at war or something like that. But so you're not always going to be able to do that with large signing bonuses and whatnot. But I do think there should be incentives for something like that, right? Like and it should be beyond just the military. Not everybody belongs in the fucking military, believe me. I was an infantryman in the 82nd, and we didn't want some people there. There's a lot of people. Most people, actually, we didn't want there, which is why we walk around acting like we're tough guys all the time. But, yeah, it's like you don't want everybody, you don't want to put somebody in a situation they don't belong in, but everybody can do something. You know what I mean? And I think, it isn't even about, I would never do it compulsory. It would always be incentive based because that's just not something I'll ever agree to is compulsory service of any sort. But I do think, it should be a big benefit. Yeah, it's in some way or another. Maybe, the GI Bill exists. I don't think maybe the GI Bill should not just exist for the military. Maybe there should be another bill that provides education assistance if you do other kind of service work for your community. Why shouldn't it? You know what I mean? Why shouldn't it? Why isn't there some fund at the state level? And some states have it for the military. But why isn't there some fund at the state level for some kid that spent 2 years in high school and another 2 in college driving for Meals on Wheels or something like that, right? Why is that not a thing? We need to tailor our entire culture around the idea of service. That's what matters. You know what I mean? It's every meaningful thing you do in life will be in the service of other people. And it matters, and it's something else you said. It matters who our heroes are, the people we looked up to. If our heroes are Jimmy Stewart and Ted Williams and Pat Tillman, people who left professional careers to go fight in wars for this country, then we're going to thrive. You know what I mean? And if our heroes are people that think more about themselves than they do about anyone else, then we're going to suffer, and we're going to get a lot of nihilism out of that. And that is unacceptable. In the greatest country in the history of the world, the first time we ever put pen to paper and said, you know what, everybody's the same. It is too great a responsibility to not focus our efforts on making sure that this persists. I mean, it's not just even for us now or even for our descendants. It's for all people, right? Like if you care about humanity at all, you should be primarily focused on outcomes in the United States because we're the only game in town. Everybody else, like people say, oh, well, Canada's free, Australia's free, Europe's free. No, the fuck they're not. Absolutely not. Did you not pay attention the last 4 or 5 years? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
People,
what's happening in the UK? People getting arrested for social media
absolutely,
posts.
fuck
It's
that.
unreal.
We are the only game in town. Period.
Yeah.
And it's not only. You may not think that this president or this congressperson or whatever the fuck is worth your effort, but that's not the point. It's the idea, right, of America that individual liberty and personal entrepreneurship are the ultimate inoculation to tyrannical bullshit. We're the only ones that got it. We're the only game in town. And you're either going to invest in it and it's going to continue and be greater and greater as time goes on, or you're going to go be a little bitch. You're going to take your ball and go home and cry about how your life went and everything's going to collapse around you. That's your choice to make. You know what I mean? It's everybody's choice to make.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people get a little too caught up in, things that are outside of their control. People will ask me, well, what can we do to change the country? And I think, we all have limited ability to exert change on these vast, unwieldy social forces, cultural trends, political trends, technological trends. But one thing you have control over is what you do today, what you do tomorrow. The people around you, what your personal goals are. You can do things that will incrementally improve your life day to day. You can do things that can incrementally or catastrophically worsen your life if you want to. Every decision you make carries with it the potential to make your life a little better or a little worse. Mm-hmm. And if you focus on better, then, it won't matter to you nearly as much who the president is or whatever the political topic of the day is or whatever the next trend is. That, focus on yourself and all the kind of basic, it's sad because it's become a cliche, but cliches are cliches for a reason. This is kind of like time-worn, age-old wisdom, and you hear it often enough, and eventually it rolls right off of you, and it sounds insincere or phony or whatever. But so many of the cliches you hear, they became that way because they work. So focusing on your health, your fitness, your family, your friends, the people around you, all of those things are much stronger predictors of happiness than whoever the president happens to
Yeah,
be, for
yeah,
example. I mean, one of the most, I mean, there are a couple of really interesting findings on this point about happiness and well-being. So one is, for example, being married, in terms of its impact on happiness, being married to someone you like. I'm not talking about like toxic, crazy marriages,
yeah,
but
yeah.
being married to someone you like has the same effect on your happiness as earning an extra $100,000 per year.
Hmm.
Having a friend that you speak to at least once per week, that has the same impact on happiness as earning an additional $60,000 per year. Even something like attending religious services. So if you attend one religious service per week, that has the same increase on happiness as going from the bottom income quartile to the
Hmm.
top income quartile. So going from the bottom
Yep.
25% to the top 25%. And these are all things that you actually have some amount of control over. Of, do you have a friend? Do you talk to regularly? Are you in a relationship? Are you seeking a relationship with someone who you get along with and that you can build a life with? Whether you're religious or not, are you finding a community of people who you can congregate with and break bread with and feel grateful to be around and all those kinds of things? And, those are more within your control than, whatever the larger cultural or political forces that are going on. But yet, those things aren't really promoted very often, and those are things that we don't frequently hear about. Um, Bringing the conversation back around to the topic of money, there's a lot of discussion about poverty, income inequality, the haves and the have-nots, and socialism and whatever UBI and all this kind of stuff. But again, if the goal is happier people, more life satisfaction, greater sense of meaning and fulfillment, and getting married to someone you like is the equivalent of earning $100,000 a year, that's $100,000 on the table that we're leaving, right?
Mhm.
Like, why don't we promote that? Why don't we talk about healthy relationships and commitment and that kind of thing? When instead people want to talk about money, but it's much easier and more feasible to get people to find someone they like and enter a relationship than for the government to start cutting $100,000 checks for everyone once a
Yeah,
year.
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's just seems reductive sometimes to even say it, but maybe just check out Maslow's hierarchy of needs at some point. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? It's like, am I fulfilling any of this stuff on the social side? I think I like Maslow's hierarchy from a need standpoint. I do think that I think the way that it's often constructed in something of like a pyramid is probably wrong. I think that there's too much of a feedback loop from the social stuff. To your point, there's a ton of research from multiple different organizations that show mindfulness or prayer or group activities and all these things, they all contribute in the same way to your brain, right? We're social creatures. The reason we built these walls is to protect each other from existential threats. We did it together to protect. We're social animals. We have to be, right, to exist.
Hmm.
So, uh, this idea that you're going to be able to completely divest from society and be okay, or that you're going to, prioritize your career over your relationships. It's just not smart, man. It's not the way that we're built. Like I like to hustle as much as the next guy. We got tons of fucking businesses over here. But, one of the things I've learned the older I get is like if I've got the option to go do the extra thing or to spend the extra time with the people I like, I should take option B every single time, right?
Hmm.
Like if there's unless people are literally depending on me and there's nobody else that can do that thing, I need to be with the people first, right? Because it shapes everything you do. You don't want to if you go into your next creative or business meeting after a miserable conversation with somebody that you care about and see how you perform versus if you just had a nice conversation with them. You know what I mean? Even somebody
Hmm.
as dead inside as I am will benefit greatly from having the positive interaction.
Hmm.
And it's like you talk about luxury beliefs, which we can talk about now, but I would say on the other side of that are self-defeating beliefs that we allow into our brains, which is like if I just work a little harder, it'll work for me, or this or that, right? It's like again, seems like a larger part of the is-ought fallacy. Like if I just work harder, things will work out for me. It's like, well, maybe, you know what I mean? Like you're not going to be able to work harder and fly. You're not going to be able to jump higher and you're just going to stay up in the air at some point. That's stupid, right? So you have to do things that work, and understanding who you are as a human being, I think, is a big part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's right. That we want to, I mean, being ostracized, not ostracized, but I guess disconnected, alienated from the rest of society, of working hard. I mean, in some ways, I think that there's a kind of a cycle here where initially, when you're a very small kid, you're dependent. You rely on other people for your survival. There's this famous line from a psychologist, Donald Winnicott, who said there's no such thing as an infant. And his point was that an infant cannot survive alone. There's always infant and mother. And so when you're small, you can't survive and you're relying on others. And then when you become a young adult, the goal is self-sufficiency. So, the hustle mindset, monk mode, all the kinds of things you hear from, young guys trying to make their way in the world, is you're self-reliant now. You don't want to rely on others. You want to provide for yourself and become a self-sustaining, self-sufficient person. But at a certain point, if you're, wise and successful and make good decisions, you'll start to produce a surplus, where you create enough value, not just to support yourself, but enough to start supporting others. And then that's when you start to turn outward and start to care for other people and become more of a leader, and someone who can provide for, wife, kids, family, that kind of thing. So you start out dependent, then you become self-sufficient, and then you become a person who others can depend upon. And that is kind of the healthy, natural path of development. But, we've kind of gone through this, strange cultural moment where no one wants to acknowledge that, there is a little bit of dependence required to develop. And then we all want to be self-sufficient and not rely on anyone else, and starting to turn inward. And you see, rates of loneliness and friendlessness and sexlessness and all this stuff going up because people don't want to take social risks anymore. And part of me wonders if this increasing social disconnect and all of the weird trends we're seeing with Gen Z. I'm sure you've seen these stats, Dan, about like the number of teenagers who are getting driver's licenses is plummeting. Fewer and fewer kids want to drive cars. Fewer kids are going out on dates. Fewer kids are going to parties. All this kind of stuff. And I think some of it is, a lot of people blame screens and technology, but I think there's an interesting nuance here where what the screens do is they give you something entertaining to do instead of doing something difficult. So in the past, if you were a teenage boy and what did your life look like? Like even when I was growing up, just as the dawn of the internet was kind of taking off, most of your time as a teenager, you go through these vast stretches of boredom. You're just bored all the time. Boredom doesn't really exist anymore, but boredom used to be a huge thing up until 2009, 2010-ish, where as a teenager, boredom was like a fact of life. And when you're bored, you start to do things that maybe in other cases you wouldn't do, which is, let me go ask that girl out, or let me try to get a driver's license, or let me find things to do to occupy my time. And that might impress people, right? Like driving a car might impress the girl you have a crush on, or getting a job might make you some more money that you can use to whatever, do these things that will improve your life a little bit. But if you have this short-term gratification device in your pocket, and you tap a few buttons and there's Uber, you tap a few buttons and there's porn, and there's entertainment and funny videos and whatever, then you don't have that same kind of mixture of pressure and boredom to get you to do those things that just a couple of decades ago every teenager was doing, and every teenager before that. So Yeah. We can talk about luxury beliefs because there is
Well, I mean, it's odd
screen
to
use
me.
and phones are part of it.
It's odd to me because there's like the Zennials or whatever the fuck they're called. I don't know what anybody's called anymore. But the younger generation is there's two big cohorts right now. One is like completely nihilist, and the other one's swinging super hard to the conservative side, which is interesting. But amongst the X and millennials, there are these luxury beliefs that should not exist. It's nonsense. It's like a completely fantastical idea that has faced no academic or practical rigor whatsoever, right? It's just like, I think, again, it's part of the is-on fallacy. Like, well, things should be this way. Okay, well, they're not. So go take your labor or your and effort and apply it to the world and try to shape the world in a way that you think is beneficial to it. That's a reasonable thing to do. Expecting something to be something that it's not right now, and then rioting or losing your mind or whatever as a result of that is fucking stupid. That's the behavior of a 5-year-old. That's not the behavior of an adult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. When things don't go your way, lashing out, and again, I think this goes back to this, lack of historical context and this feeling of entitlement that if you feel any amount of discomfort, and not physical discomfort, but psychological discomfort, that someone holds an opinion you don't agree with, and it feels painful, emotionally painful in the moment, but in the past we learned to deal with it, and that's how you resolve disagreements. Ideally, is through words rather than violence. But you see people shouting down speakers they don't like, and in some cases, I see your shirt, Dan. This can erupt in these brutal acts of murder, and yeah, it's alarming. Not only the fact that people will commit those acts of violence, because in a country of 350 million people, some non-trivial percentage of them are a little bit crazy and will do unhinged things. Just a fact of living in a social world where, statistics are a reality and whatever. But what's even more alarming to me are the people who aren't crazy. They are normal seeming people who have jobs and are generally, seemingly well adjusted, but they will condone those acts of violence and will condone all of these, crazy beliefs that can lead to instability and disruption and violence. And yeah, that's a political violence that can quickly spiral out of control.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, a lot of it is rooted in, the luxury beliefs. A lot of these are born on college campuses of, these are ideas that maybe make you sound interesting and sophisticated and that you have the privilege of believing because of your fortunate circumstances. But then other people are the ones who pay the price for that. I mean, if the people who are championing and cheering on political violence now, if that becomes normalized, like if violence becomes more normalized, they are going to be, among the last to be personally affected by it. Because a lot of them, they live in relatively safe neighborhoods, the security guards and gated neighborhoods and all this kind of stuff. But if attacking people for having different views than you is normalized, that'll affect other people who are far less fortunate.
Yeah, and that's I mean, we used to call it NIMBY, I guess. But now it's just like NIMBY used to be Martha's Vineyard, or Cape Cod. Well, not all of Cape Cod. There's a lot of fucking opiate addicts up there too. But like nice areas, like super wealthy people used to be not in my backyard. Now it's like it's gone from I guess direct impact stuff to more social impact stuff, where people can hold these beliefs that are dangerous. I think. And look, I'm not going to tell anybody what they can or cannot believe. That's evil, I think. Like your ultimate right is a property right. Your ultimate property is yourself, and the ultimate expression of that is your thoughts, and your speech is thoughts. You can say whatever the fuck you want. There's going to be consequences. I don't think the government can stop you, is what I'm saying. I won't patronize you or your business if you act like an asshole, but I do think that we're not doing much these days to root out people who have not luxury beliefs, because I think luxury beliefs are a result of this toxic suicidal empathy stuff in a lot of ways, where it's like people have garnered large audiences and gotten a good reception by playing victim in public. And now, I mean, for people who are not kind of read into this situation, it seems like everybody's hurting all the time. You know what I mean? And a natural human reaction to that is to say, hey, these people are hurting. We've got to help them. And then you hear people that are more in tune to the situation saying, or maybe more educated when it comes to philosophy, economics, particularly political philosophy, where it's like, okay, this sounds like a good idea, but here's the historical version of it, and it doesn't work. It only makes it worse, and you're going to be the one that suffers because of it. It seems callous. It seems like, oh, you don't even care. Not only do you not care, but you hate those people. Like, no, I love my country, and I'm not going to see it become one of these other countries. It's not. I want everybody here to be as successful as they possibly can be. That's the difference. You know what I mean? But it's difficult. It's difficult to communicate to that to somebody when I guess they're kind of depolarized when it comes to masculinity. You know what I mean? Like trying to try to explain to a mom whose baby just fell that it's good for the baby to experience a little pain from time to time, which is true, by the way, not for a literal baby, but for like a 3-year-old. It's good to be able to become resilient at a young age. But when the mom sees the baby fall and it's crying, and you're like, hey, just relax. That's probably not the best way to talk to the mom, you know what I mean? But we're talking about adults here, people with, agency and decision-making capabilities. We have to have adult conversations about this stuff that, one, as I mentioned, tell people the actual truth and then show them the pathway on that path of truth that gets them to the success they want. I think that's important too. You got to spend a little time educating, but also you've got to reject bad ideas aggressively. Like, not only is that dumb, but it's dangerous, and we're not going to tolerate that shit here.
It's dangerous. And you mentioned that suicidal empathy impulse from the behavioral scientist Gad Saad, and I think that's spot on. This feeling of it just feels like empathy. It doesn't feel suicidal. It just feels like you're being a good person, that you have this compassion for this group. I think some of it is authentic. I mean, most of it probably is. But then the people who attempt to elicit that empathy oftentimes are duplicitous. They aren't actually being mistreated or beleaguered in any way, but they know that we live in a relatively empathic and compassionate culture, and that if you disguise yourself as a victim, you can elicit moral compassion and empathy and support from people. And the conversation that we haven't had in our society is, yes, it's true that there are actual victims, fine, but it's also true that if victims are rewarded, then there will be people who fake victimhood in order to obtain those benefits. And so where's that line between just saying yes to, if you call yourself a victim, yes, we're going to care for you and support you and give you preferential treatment and financial resources and support and everything? Or is it maybe we should evaluate claims of victimhood, and if you reach a certain threshold, then we will do those things for you. But if we think that maybe you're lying or you're misleading people or trying to manipulate people, then we're not going to give you those benefits. But we have this some people call like the feminization of our society, where we just have to treat every claim of victimhood as 100% valid. And if you even think to question it, then you're heartless and unempathic and so on. And, this feeling of wanting to protect these marginalized groups and not wanting anyone to feel any pain whatsoever. And it's a strange mix of, the thing that seems to fuel a lot of violence is that sort of moralistic impulse. It's a great book from a few years ago called Virtuous Violence by Alan Fisk and Taj Ray. And they talk about this, how so much of the violence we see in the world isn't this kind of psychopathic, sadistic, unfeeling, mechanistic violence. Rather, a lot of violence is committed because people feel this surge of moral energy of this person is a threat, and if we don't take them out, then this person is going to harm us in some way, or they've already caused harm, so we need to extinguish them. And and so this is actually, in fact, what fuels a lot of this stuff, is people thinking that their heart is in the right place, they're doing the right thing, and then the outcome is death and destruction and instability and coercion and all these other things that by now it's a cliche, but it's more real now in the light of recent events that words are words and violence is violence. But if you start to conflate those two things, then really anything goes. If I say something to you and you feel offended, and then you shoot me, and then someone I know says, well, you shot him, if the proper reaction to bad words is violence, then what's the proper reaction to violence? More violence. And this can quickly turn into catastrophe.
Yeah. Tell me about. I mean, we spoke a little bit about it, but tell me about the book.
Yeah.
And what's the. Obviously, it's a memoir. It's about your life, but what's the message you want people to take from this?
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of different messages. I think one is, when we talk about social mobility, we think of education as the end all and be all of, oh, well, the problem these kids have is lack of education. So we just need to put more kids from dysfunctional and deprived backgrounds into college, and they'll go on to get a nice middle class white collar job and live happily ever after. And of course, the statistics don't bear that out. I mean, very few kids who grew up the way that I did, are ever on that trajectory anyway.
Mm.
But one of the points I make is I actually did follow that trajectory of, getting degrees from good schools and whatever, schools that used to be good, and then, got a pretty successful job and everything. And one point I make is that this isn't going to make up for living that kind of life as a kid, that we want to make sure that kids as kids live good lives, not that we should ensure later on in their life that they make enough money and get a bunch of degrees or something.
Mm.
And the way that we do that is to promote strong families, commitment, relationships, and making sure that if you want to have kids, you find a good partner, and that you put the needs of the kid and the family before your own needs and that kind of thing. And then the second thing, and this is more on the individual level, is one of the takeaways that I had from 8 years in the Air Force is that motivation is overrated and that self-discipline is actually more important, because motivation is just a feeling of, you either want to do it or you don't. And if you don't feel motivated. And so you just don't do it. Whereas self-discipline is more important, because what self-discipline is I'm going to do this regardless of how I feel.
Mm.
You don't feel motivated. Well, too bad. You got to do it. And you can apply that logic to something as simple as a gym routine where, it shouldn't matter how motivated you feel to go work out or not. It's, do you have the self-discipline to go do it anyway? And if you can force yourself to do something you don't like, but that's still good for you, and you do that for enough days in a row, then you'll slowly start to see your life transform. And that was what I saw, once I started to prioritize my own future, is make good decisions every single day, whether it felt good in the moment or not. And slowly my life started to improve. And I tell the stories in the book of my friends as well, whose lives didn't go that way. I'm the only one of my friends who ever went to college. Um, and I had five close friends growing up, and describe, their paths and their outcomes. I had two friends who went to prison. I had another friend who tried to join a gang and was shot to death. And then my other remaining friends are just kind of, working decent jobs, and they're doing all right in their lives, but they're suffering and struggling in their own way. And I don't think that, contrary to a lot of people who set education policy and who, belong to that kind of chattering class, who think, oh, well, if we had just put all those kids in the right environment, funded the schools enough, redistributed enough money, that somehow all five of my friends would have gone on to college and, lived that kind of happily ever after kind of life. Um, I'm skeptical, because none of them liked school that much. I was the only one of my friends who liked to read for pleasure, and who would, kind of do the assignments for fun, and, read and do all those kinds of things. They didn't like it. And I don't think that if they had been raised with more money or better funded schools or anything, they would have changed all that much in terms of their academic aptitude. But I do think that if they had been raised in different families, maybe if their dads had been around, that they wouldn't have gone to prison, they wouldn't have been shot to death. So I don't know how much we can raise the ceiling as far as academic aptitude, but I do think we can raise the floor as far as how far these young guys can drop in the cracks of society and where their lives end up. And then, finally, for the third part of the book, roughly the final third, is, the commentary on luxury beliefs, and how a lot of these are having these horrible downstream consequences. Luxury beliefs, ideas and opinions that confer status on credentialed and affluent people while inflicting costs on the less fortunate members of society. So, denigrating family and downplaying the role of fatherlessness, trying to defund the police, and the whole, abolition of prisons, decarceration, um, abandoning standardized testing requirements. I think the rise of screen use and devices. There are a lot of other factors here, but those are examples of luxury beliefs that in the moment they sound good. If you remember, there was a lot of talk about how iPads and smartphones and tablets, this was going to revolutionize education and bring education to poor kids who wouldn't otherwise have access. And instead, you see that poor kids spend twice as much time on their phones as kids from upper middle class families. So poor kids spend about 6 hours per day on their phones compared with 3 hours per day from kids from more affluent families. And those kids aren't spending 6 hours a day on Duolingo and, learning arithmetic. They're spending 6 hours a day, watching TikTok and I don't know, what do kids do? Play Candy Crush or something, whatever phone games that kids are playing now. And, this is something that sounded good in the moment, made a lot of tech entrepreneurs very rich, and instead kids started to fall further behind in their education. Same thing with fatherless homes, same thing with defund the police, with the rise of violent crime. It's the poor people, the marginalized people, the people who these members of the luxury belief class claim to care about. Those are the ones who suffer the most when those luxury beliefs spread throughout society and are implemented into policy. And so, the final third of the book is really aimed at those people who think that they're doing something good when often they're making society worse, and they should be aware of that fact.
Yeah.
I don't think everyone who has luxury beliefs are necessarily malicious. You mentioned Hanlon's razor earlier. I think some small percentage of them probably are malicious, honestly. I think a lot of people who are of that kind of socialist or communist strand, they actually do have deep antipathy to the United States and will promote any policy that could potentially weaken it, including things like defund the police or whatever. But I would say a much larger percentage of people, 80, 90% of people who espouse these luxury beliefs, they just want to feel good. They think that they're doing the right thing. On the surface, it sounds compassionate. It sounds like it's going to improve people's lives. But, as Thomas Sowell reminds us, sounding good is not is not the basis for a sound policy.
Yeah. I think that's an important thing to know. A lot of these people are misguided, but their instinct to help other people and make things better is both good and natural. I think that's, before we throw the baby out with the bathwater, I think it's a really important thing to recognize. And then to the other one, even if you created a perfect environment for success for literally every single kid, I think you would probably get, without the underlying principles, the same amount of success and failure, to be honest. I mean, how many trust fund kids or young athletes who have suddenly become rich or musicians or something have blown everything and ruined their lives? There is an attitude that is principle driven and resilient that will make you succeed, and there's an attitude that is entitled or stupid or whatever. I mean, there's a bunch of different attitudes that will make you fail, and it has nothing to do with where you started necessarily. Obviously, starting on third base is nice. But if you start on third base in a wheelchair, not so nice. Everybody go check out this book. It is Troubled, a memoir, of foster care, family, and social class. I think there's a lot of important information in here, and I appreciate you coming on the show today to talk about it.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, sir. And tell everybody where they can find you if you got other writing and stuff going on as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned the book, and then I write regularly on Substack. That's robkhenderson.com is my Substack newsletter, and you can follow me on all the social media pages at Rob K. Henderson.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming today again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
Yes, sir, and thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.